Now, the objective of Operation Totalize had been to take Falaise, which is 20 miles south of Caen, that way. That didn't happen. Now, the Allies did have Hill 195, which is over there, and they had taken Hill 140, which is just over there, but that was taken by the Worthington force on the 9th, but due to communication and navigation problems, the hill was retaken in a tragic battle. Now, with the pocket forming after Operation Cobra, Montgomery had wanted to operate a long hook and catch the Germans at the River Seine. The thinking was that with the Seine on their backs, the Germans couldn't counterattack across the Seine to try and free the Germans being caught in the trap. But events led to a short hook being more practical. Directive 518 from Montgomery ordered the 1st British Army and the 2nd Canadian Army to strive to take Falaise. Bonjour. On August the 12th, General Simmons started planning what was first called Operation Tallulah and became known as Operation Tractable. He used the same basic tactics as in Totalize. That was an aerial bombing before the attack and using embushed troops in Kangaroos to keep the troops moving the same speed as the tanks. But instead of, like in Totalize, when he used darkness to hide their movements, he was going to use smoke to hide the movements in daytime. Tractable was launched on the 12th of August. Now, the Canadians didn't know it, but they were starting with a handicap. One of the Canadian officers had been caught by the Germans, and he had the plans for the operation on him. However, the Germans expected the thrust of the attack to go down the main road. Now, to avoid the strong German defences in Kenny Wood, which is that way, Simmons moved the axe of the attack 2 kilometres to the east. So the start line was between Estrée-le-Compagne, which is that way, and Soignol, which is just down there. The 3rd Canadian Infantry would be on the right, and the 4th Canadian Armoured Division would be on their left. At the same time, the 51st Highland Division, the Black Watch, would start an attack on their flank towards Bou-sur-Rouvre, which is even further that way. Now, in the first phase, 2 armoured brigades would rush to form a bridgehead over the Laison, and then 2 embussed infantry brigades would join them to form a firm defence between Montebois and Mézières. And then 2 further brigades would march to pass through the first line. In the second phase, armour with marching infantry would advance 9 kilometres to take Hill 184, 165 and 159, just 2 kilometres from Falaise. The aerial bombing would concentrate on Kenny Wood, and then the other side of the Caen-Falaise road, Bontassier and Potigny. Now, the Germans had the plans, so they had time to move some troops out the way of the advance and get some artillery in position, but they didn't have much time to act. By 11:30 on the 14th, there were 480 tanks ready, 1,500 vehicles and 12,000 troops ready to move. They were waiting for the aerial bombardment. Now, this grouping was just to the north of Hill 140, and the Germans mainly to the south of the hill, so they couldn't see the Allied troops amassing. Now, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, they formed up between La Croix, Robe Rouge, Renemenil, which is this way. The 4th Canadian Armoured Group, they were northeast of Soignol, which is over that way. Against them was the decimated Hitler Youth 12th SS with the 89th Division, and also the newly arrived 85th Division. And they had 2,900 men and 35 operational Panzers. Now the first defence line, which is the other side of Hill 140, was just 600 yards deep, made up of the 85th Division. Then behind that were flak guns, artillery, Nebelwerfers. Then after that, there was 12 miles before the Germans who were facing the Americans coming from Argenton. At 11:37, the Canadian artillery fired red smoke shells onto the German positions to show the approaching 53 Allied bombers where to bomb along the River Laisel. Now this bombing stopped at 11:55, but the artillery kept pounding the German positions. Now due to the smoke, the Germans' fire was sporadic, but the German artillery knew where the Canadians must be coming from, and they managed to knock out 20 tanks, even in the smoke. But for the German soldiers under the smoke, they were overrun in their trenches by tanks. If they survived that, they would then surrender to the following troops. Now, it was difficult for tanks to see where they were going in the smoke. The drivers managed to follow the sun. They could just about see that through the smoke. But some of the tanks overtook the tanks they're supposed to be following, and other tanks fell in German anti-tank ditches. By 12:30, the first tanks of the Royal Canadian Hussars had reached the Laisel. They also found that the little 2-metre wide stream was a far more formidable obstacle than they'd been told. The stream bed was muddy, and the first tank got stuck. In other places, the banks were steep. The Germans covered the obvious places to cross. Fascine tanks carrying bundles of staves were coming to fill in ditches and streams, but some tankers decided not to wait and moved across the river. Major Gordon of the 1st Hussars couldn't find a suitable place at Assy, so he moved northeast towards Rouve. There he found some engineers inspecting the damaged bridge. They told him it wasn't safe to use, so he told one of his tanks to ford the river, and he got stuck. Now Gordon now led his tanks through the village, taking small arms fire. They machine gunned any house suspected to have Germans in. A barn with a truck in blew up, but still not finding a suitable crossing place, Gordon returned to the bridge. Fascines had filled in the gaps with staves. A tank slowly went across with no trouble. Gordon now regrouped his tanks to organise the next objective. That was a ridge between Montebois and the Sommier. Now at the same time, the engineers had arranged another 2 crossings of the Laisel within 400 yards of the bridge, and the bridge was now capable of taking 40-ton tanks. By the evening, the bulk of the tanks had used 3 crossings to get across south of the Laisel. By 12:55, Embused soldiers from the Dormont, Dundas, Glengarry Highlanders debused near Assy. Now they overcame the first resistance of the 85th Division, but past the chateau, which is there behind me, the fighting became bitter. So they called up some Wasps. Now many of you must have heard of the Crocodiles. There was a Churchill flamethrower tank. Well, these Wasps were flamethrowers, but they were on a universal carrier. So the 3 of them advanced on an 85-yard front, and they soon dispatched the 4 machine guns which were holding up the troops. And the machine guns were covered by a Tiger tank, which was just to their right. And the Germans at the 4th machine gun didn't even wait for the Wasp to arrive. They abandoned their machine gun and ran away. So within 15 minutes of the Wasps arriving. The two bridges here were under control. By the end of the 14th, they'd advanced 9.5 kilometres. By this rate, at the end of the 15th, they'd be in Falaise. From midday on the 15th, the Canadian Scottish were ready at Juno, which is behind me now. They had to cross the field to come over here, and up there was a hedge. That was perpendicular to their advance. Then further over there was a hedge parallel to their advance. Now there were machine guns in the first hedge, manned by the 26 SS, 26 Regiment, that's the 12th SS. And then there were machine guns in the next hedge. Now the Canadians would have to rely on their own weapons, plus the Shermans, but no artillery support, as the rapid advance of the 14th left the artillery back out of range. They were leaving point 175 to head for point 168. But you can see the land is so flat, you can't really tell where the summits are. Had to cross the Castillo, heading for the first hedge. Where there were two machine guns. There are another two along the long hedge, which is over there. And they started off at 1300 hours, taking casualties from those machine guns. Shortly afterwards, mortars and machine guns to their left took them in enfilade fire. To make it worse, the Shermans now held back due to the accurate fire coming from two Tigers to the southeast, which is that way, and another one to the southwest. Now, being supported by tanks from the rear doesn't have the same morale boost as tanks next to you. Some of the men in Henderson's D Company were replacements, and this was their first time under fire. Some started going to ground. The officers and NCOs did a great job of getting the men to the first hedge by alternately forging ahead or going back to encourage the men to move. By advancing on both sides of the long hedge, B Company flushed out the snipers and machine guns from there. Company A was following up, but came under fire from 6 Panzers in an orchard that had been cleared already. 2 Canadian NCOs courageously used PIATs to make the tanks retreat. By 1630, Company D held its objective, the path running across Hill 168. They had paid a high price in casualties as the fanatical SS soldiers wouldn't surrender. One shot himself in the mouth rather than be taken prisoner. Tractable came to an end, with Falaise still not being held. Simmons had changed the main axis of their advance more to the east, heading towards Train to close the Falaise pocket. Falaise was attacked from the west on the 16th by the Fusiliers Mont Royal, backed up by tanks from the Sherbrooke Fusiliers. Now the first approach into Falaise came down this valley from the west. Now this building here was actually a museum for many years, but it was badly placed in Falaise and not enough people came. And when they built the Overlord Museum near Omaha Beach, many of the exhibits from this museum went there, especially the German tanks. It's not till the 17th that the last resistance is overcome. Some SS were held out in the girls' school, which was here. The town had been bombed several times and destroyed by 80%.